All right, so like I promised, we want now to get into a discussion to do with the new curriculum and also just looking really at the benefits and how it has been modified to ensure that children with special needs are also catered for. Let me introduce my guest this morning, Dr. Sarah Ruto, who's the chair of the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. Thank you very much for your time, and Karibu to News Center. So I think we'll start from, first of all, where we are at with the pilot. Has it started already?
Indeed, yes. This has been a continuation because the first pilot began last year when we went to about 470, 480 schools, 10 schools per county. And this was to tease out the various documents that the technical team had prepared. Thereafter, and based on the information that came, we felt that the time was right to now have a full census. And the reason why we are taking it slow is because we are learning from the past and some of the mistakes that we had made. So the pilot is very much on. And the plan is that by August of this year, we will have put together our thoughts, reviews we've gotten, doubts, hopes, strengths, weaknesses, to be able to have the national conference. And after the national conference, that is when one can plan, hopefully then, for the official launch next year.
Next year.
Yes.
So what's the feedback that you're getting so far from the ground with the places where the pilot is already in effect?
Varied. So if we start with the issue of the teachers, it covers the whole continuum. There's some who are excited and who already had begun the process of rethinking. Because this curriculum, it's not that we are starting it. There are citizens who are ahead of the curve. So where you get that group of teachers, they have embraced it because they feel it offers an opportunity to actually offer a pedagogy, a way of teaching and learning that is more responsive to children. So we have that group. And
teachers who embraced it.
Who have embraced it. Yeah. And by the way, who have interpreted the curriculum in ways that we hadn't thought about. So that is very exciting. To the other teachers who have not, who are still doing things in the old way, who are still buying assessments. From the various people who have been doing assessments and using that even in grades 1 and 2 to assess. So it's a whole continuum, and it means that we really need to improve on the quality checks so that we do not have some people taking it and running away with it while others are behind.
And talking about the people who are behind, what is the reason that they have? Is it that, just human nature, they're a bit slow to change, or they have an issue with, the way the curriculum has been prepared?
I think first and foremost, even if we look at ourselves, any change that comes takes a while. You start from resistance, then you have a conversation with yourself, and finally you see the benefits. So there is that part, that there is just a whole process of navigating change, and sometimes it takes longer for some people than others. Secondly, in my own assessment, and we will need to get a little bit more evidence on this, I think that the further away you are from the center where information flows quickly, you have access to other people who are in other systems of education where you interact, you'll find that that's the only way they know. So very recently I came from Turkana Central, and we went right to the deep of schools where information flow, even getting a newspaper is a problem. So obviously change will happen slower there unless you come with some sort of affirmative action that ensures then and levels the table, so to speak. And for us, that is one of the things that we think we need to start responding to, the equity issues that come when trying to come with change in the curriculum.
All right. So have you been able to mark the difference between how the curriculum is being adopted, in places where you're piloting in urban centers or urban areas or the major towns compared to other places which are a bit interior? Is that where the difference really is, that the access, which goes back to the bigger conversation about, marginalization of certain areas of the country?
I think the concerns that we have when you're talking about education in different sectors, you're seeing it bearing fruit when you're talking about curriculum reform. So when you have inequities that come as a result of region, like for example, if you're in northern Kenya or places which were closed out or for various reasons,
Right.
historical, infrastructure, whatever, then changes take a little bit of time. You have inequalities that come as a result of language, for example. Those who speak specific languages might have an advantage over the others simply because of the language policy, especially as you go on. Inequalities because of gender, perhaps most importantly, inequalities because of household economies. So these are not specific to the curriculum reform process,
Right.
but when thinking about the curriculum reform process, you must pay attention to that. So what has happened is that there has been a national rollout, and now it's the time to actually start looking at that in this time so that we do not have fluctuations
Yes.
and differences and evenness
Yes, yes.
in uptake.
In uptake. All right, let's now go and turn our focus to the special needs, the students, which is really the basis of our conversation this morning. And I've read a number of articles in my research that really is applauding the new curriculum, that it's taking care of the special needs students as compared to the one previously. So let's talk about, I mean, children with hearing disability, visual disability. From your end, what does this curriculum have to offer these students?
Okay. First and foremost, whether the child has a disability or does not have a disability, we have the same vision. And that vision, if I was to break down the curriculum, is twofold. We want to the curriculum to be able, at the end of the day, to give us a good person. And a good person is one who is judged by their character. And how are we doing this? Through various aspects. So you will see, for example, there's a bigger emphasis of parental engagement in the new curriculum, whether the child has disability or not, community service, on values, on character, because you want a good person. If you do not have a good person, they will not be able to be functional in society. So that is for all children. The second thing that we want is a useful person. And this is where we're talking about competence. A useful person is one who is able to perform at whichever level they are, whether academic or non-academic. Whether if they have a disability, there will be something they'll be able to do or not able to do. So, having started there that we want a good person and a useful person, the new curriculum is about instilling and imbibing character and competence. Those two must go together. And this is a stress that perhaps was not quite there in the old system. It's a new way of doing things, but we are not the only ones. If you look at other countries, Singapore, exactly, you know, they have already done this, and it has allowed them to rethink the purpose of education for their country. So what about the disabled children then? So what we did, which was different again in terms of planning, is that all the planning and the designs, especially what is being piloted now, was done with disabled persons in the panels. So the way the curriculum is developed,
they were involved from the get-go.
Completely.
Right.
You know, we have we went by the saying, and they say it: if it is not by us, it is not for us. That is what they normally say in the disability circles, and we respected that, and it is true, because if it is not by them, definitely it cannot
Nobody
address.
else would understand.
It cannot. It cannot.
Yeah.
So all the panels, we had about 22 panels, so that if you're talking about language activities, there's a panel, they were involved. It made the process a little bit more expensive, but I think for the first time, we have a planned curriculum that has a perspective of people with disabilities, whether they have hearing impairments, visual, whatever the case may be. And I think that was a first step, which was not there. So there was much more understanding that everybody needs to be cognizant of the fact that children are different. And that difference is that they could have a disability, and they have a right that when the curriculum is being developed, their views, perceptions are included. So I think that was a good first step. However, that is still the planning phase. Remember, we have to go to the implementation. And probably you might say that is where the rubber meets the road. And we are just in the first 2 years, we have tried to improve on our monitoring efforts so that we can learn to what extent has this planned curriculum that took 2 years and which is now fully being implemented now responsive for those children who can be integrated. For the other children who cannot be integrated, there is a full curricular setup that is running parallel.
Completely different.
Yes. Because, like, for example, if you have a severe disability like mental health, for example, so you might not be able to fit in, but there are certain things you can do at your level.
Okay.
And perhaps, given the advances in medicine, you can actually participate and be integrated. So there's a both vertical but also horizontal ways in which you can connect.
Right, interesting.
Yes.
Going back to the to the modification, so let's talk about. I mean, this new curriculum will see, students using, different equipment like, the laptops. So when you talk about the integrated and the one that is completely parallel, will all of these different groups have access to all these new things that are being introduced by this curriculum?
In principle, they should. In practice, there's still work that needs to be done. So, like, for example, let us look at the whole aspect of digital literacy.
Yes.
This is one of the 7 competencies that has been decided that any child going through the system must have some level of digital literacy.
Yes.
Because that's the world of today, probably the world of tomorrow. I have been told in some countries, of every 10 jobs being created, 9 of them have to do with something to do with digital technology. We haven't done any assessment in our own country, but imagine even if it is 5 of the 10 jobs being created demand that, then every child, even if you have a disability, you need to be given that competence. So there's an acknowledgement and understanding that is what we need to do. I think one of the areas that we need to do a little bit more work is how we can take these gadgets and make them more responsive. For example, to visually impaired.
Yes.
The visually impaired will need some type of talking laptops or whatever the case may be. Some work has been done, more could be done, building that interactiveness and working on the senses that makes sense to a person who has a hearing impaired as opposed to a person who has a visual impairment.
Okay.
So that is something that we still need to continue working. Maybe you can just say that at least we have an understanding that it's an area that still needs a lot of work. But I wouldn't say that we have the full answer. Work is still going on.
Work is still going on.
Yes.
And as you talk about work still going on, what about the teachers? Is there capacity building for teachers who will be spending more time and maybe will be needed to be more in touch and involved with these special students or the integrated students? Are they going to receive the same training as teachers who would handle, the other kids?
We already have in existence KISE, the Kenya Institute of Special Education. And that is the specialist institute that actually is supposed to equip the teachers with knowledge, skills, attitudes to make them good teachers for children with disabilities. But these are institutions where a rethinking and retraining needs to happen. So, for example, one of the things that we are doing in the Institute is we are developing a curriculum for teacher training institutions to make it fit with the posture, with the attitude of the new curriculum.
Right.
And the same can be said about also thinking about KISE and what it needs to do in terms of creating this new teacher. Very much the kind of new teacher I think we saw in the screen just a few minutes ago. And maybe let me stress one thing, is that the reason why the review is happening now is because it was time. And there are teachers and parents who were not waiting for this review. They had already thought through, already even started schools outside that were more responsive to the needs of their children. And I think it is important to recognize these parents, for me, and teachers, who for me are the new educators, the educators who are thinking. And they are the people, when I'm thinking about translating from these documents that we have to practice, these are the places we go through, looking at what people who are not waiting to be told have done, and it's very exciting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's also just talk about the numbers, really, the numbers of children with disabilities who have been out of school for one reason or the other. Are we likely to see these numbers of students increase now that there's, this modification, there's this opportunity that is being presented by the new curriculum?
The new curriculum is only one of the reforms that the Ministry of Education is doing. I think there are about 15 or so reforms. And one of the other reforms that the Ministry of Education had been doing is actually just looking at and improving special needs.
Right.
Because about 5 or 10% of the children still continue to be outside. If you have money, then it's possible that you're more responsive to a child with disabilities than a parent who does not have. That is what it is. And so what has happened is that at least there has been an increase in the capitation grant. This is the amount of money allocated to each child has at least been increased with an effort to improve access even before you talk about anything else.
Right.
And that work must continue.
It must continue. All right. So finally, how are we expecting to see what are going to be the how can I ask it? For you as KICD, what will be the indicators that this curriculum is actually going to work, even as you await for, what did you say, August, when you'll have the national conference where you'll now be discussing the pros, the cons, what you've been able to gather from the ground, the reviews and so forth?
The indicators of success. The indicators of success, I'd like to look at it first from the learner's point of view. That the learner is meeting the curricular objectives in terms of learning the items that had been set out. And the items that have been set out this time, there is a less emphasis on knowledge, on, cramming, understanding, to more on doing. So if a child, for example, and in the early years, there are just 5 learning areas. So you have language area, you have numeracy, then you have creative arts, environmental. So there are just 5 broad learning areas. And these are learning areas from preschool up to grade 1, 2, and 3. And that's why we are calling those 5 years the early years.
Early years.
No break as before. So the indicator of success, by the time a child is completing early years, grade 3, they should be able to read, they should be able to do basic numeracy. Those are the foundational courses.
Plus the social skills, communication skills.
Yeah, and that is on the competency side. Then on character side, they also need to have learned or been nurtured into those aspects that you will say that this child truly has respect, because respect is one of the values that is being taught in the curriculum.
All right.
Yeah, and so it's going to be very different from before, where we were only stressing on the academic.
On the academics and the results.
The Kenya National Examination Council is taking a lead in coming up with the assessment framework. And this assessment framework is what will allow teachers to understand what they need to do in terms of formative assessment. You cannot wait for somebody who has set an examination outside. They do not know where your child is.
Right.
Because we are going according to the level. And according to the level for both the disabled child or not, you must teach and reach the child where they are and take them on, rather than come up with a curriculum, say this is the curriculum, and teach the child to the curriculum. That is where we lost it before.
All right. And that's why you're doing things a bit different this time round. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah Ruto. She's the chair of the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. Thank you very much for your time.